to The Truth in This Art. I am your host, Rob Lee, and today I am talking to Baltimore's longest active graffiti writer. Please welcome Adam Stab. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks for having me.
Totally. And just for the record, for those who don't get it, it's not Stabe. It's not accented. It's
Stab.
It's a doing thing. So you're based in Baltimore. You moved into the area. So what initially attracted you to? Well, where's your story start, and what initially attracted you to this community?
Well, I started writing graffiti, not too long after I finally got to Baltimore, which was in I moved here in '83. Probably started writing in late '84. So it was kind of a quick transition into picking that up as a vocation in youth, partially because I was not real connected otherwise to any other groups of kids. And so being sort of a new kid in town and going through all of that kind of like amount of time it took to kind of learn to cut the mustard with the locals and get in with folks in either school or the neighborhood. I spent a lot of time on my own and had already come from a background of being real. I spent a lot of time traversing the landscape. That was kind of where I had come from. I grew up in the Midwest in Southern Illinois and spent some years in North Central Florida before I was here. So my whole childhood upbringing, my little tyke years were very run at will till the sun came down, plus, without real adult supervision and worrying about shit. So by the time I got here at 13 to the city, I was not very privy to much oversight. I was used to doing my thing. And so I jumped immediately into that. It was comfortable. And for a good little minute, did it on my own, because even as I developed friendships, I found that kids, especially like in for example, that I was friends with in the neighborhood, as I began to meet people on the east side of town where I'm still located, people weren't just as apt to like run across town on the bus to go to Lexington Market. That shit was unheard of to them. Going downtown, especially after hours at night, was like, oh my God, are you kidding me? You're doing what? But that was just more how I had come up with, like, it's not like my mom didn't really care where I was at. It was just like we just had different rules and standards of like what was going on safety wise, because you didn't have to worry when I was coming up in the cut, like literally in the sticks, so it's very different. But found graffiti at about that age, 13 and a half, going on 14 years old was when I started writing for real. And found it just traversing the cities and alleyways of downtown in Baltimore City by myself on the lone, got like real turned on and attracted to this thing that was happening. And then in the hands of a very small, intimate group of guys who were responsible for the tiny little scene that we had at the time.
So part of just kind of being out there, being a person that is, as you said, the traversing, you're being in the city, you're able to see different things, different vantage points, going through the city, taking a look at the structure, the buildings, the alleys, the walls, all of that different stuff. It gives you a better sense of that lay of the land, especially being someone that is new here. You're really getting at that time, really getting the lay of what's around.
Oh yeah. I mean, I was super turned on by that. My mom moved here to work for Hopkins initially. That was our motivation to come here. She had been getting her doctorate in North Central Florida at University of Florida. And so when that set of years was up, I was excited, though it was like a tough time to transition out of my friendship circle and what was going on with my lifestyle in Florida, because it was its own thing. But I can remember being real amped up about the fact that we were moving to a city, you know, and because I had already gotten like, I was let's see, I had some serious urban references in my mind already. Like I was skateboarding already regularly living in Florida. So I grew up at the same skate park that a guy named Rodney Mullen, that was a really early on freestyle sponsored skateboarder for Powell Peralta skateboards early on in their inception. And so I grew up at this kind of concrete wave skate park, exposed to stuff that gave me some sense of what was cool about a city, or what kind of cool stuff was coming out of a city, though I'd never lived in one and never really been exposed to one. So I was amped about getting here. Though in comparison to the amount of time I spent sort of, again, really going at it alone, because it was a very tough place to break into friendship circles, and to not, the first year of being here was like, my books getting thrown under the bus, repeatedly type of, you're like, oh, the new guy, we have to torture you, right? Like, yes,
like,
so it was rough, transitioning into the city in that sense was a motherfucker. Yeah, it was hard. I saw my first handgun in, what grade was it? 6th grade? 7th grade? Two grades before, 6th grade, in science class. Just a kid, like, who was showing off his gun to kids,
Wow.
No kind of thing going on, no strife, no nothing going on. Just a young kid had a gun. Yeah. And he was showing it to other kids in science classes. Like, yo, check it out. Like, I don't know. I had never experienced anything like that before, like I'd seen hunting guns and that type of shit before. My grandpa's old revolver from the war.
Yeah. It's like, I got this next to the Bunsen burner.
Right. Like it's 6th grade science class. It's like, what, So that side of the getting used to it was a whole different, like the romance was not really there. I did find it in these other ways and means. By luck of the draw, I was going to school. One of the first places I went to grade school was a school. It's not called this anymore. At the time, it was called Herring Run. And it was way out east from where I lived, even in Highlandtown. But 2 days a week, I had gotten myself into the after school program at the School for the Arts, their Twigs outreach program. So a couple days a week, I would get out of school, basically stop in the neighborhood a second, hop back on the city bus, poof it downtown for my art class, and show up just in time for all the ballerinas and everybody to be letting out. And so I was just mesmerized with that spot. Yeah. And basically being downtown, like all of a sudden I was like downtown on my own, traversing that environment, right, just south of Micah and the art museums and so that became my stomping ground regularly. Yeah. And I grew up again like this kind of Fast Times at Ridgemont High style life, just very recently in Florida, having slices at the mall and riding my mongoose, and playing video games at the arcade and shit. Yeah. And so the best thing that I could come up with to suffice for that was like finding video games on the block. So I would get out of class at School for the Arts, which wasn't until like they would let out at 4:10, and then I would take a 2-hour class as a 7th grader or whatever. So that, even wintertime hours, it was pitch dark by the time I got out of my class, my art class, and I would hit the block for some video games at Pollock Johnny's, So
oh, yeah.
I was in the thick of what was going on in Baltimore from early on, hanging out in places I probably questionably shouldn't have been, again, because I had built a trust with my mom that she knew I was coming home and I was going to make my way there. Yeah. Of course, kids these days, they don't understand how before the era of any kind of communication that all this was, when you left the house in the morning to go to school, you was on your own till nightfall, or like whenever you ran into moms, you know, if you did, till the next day, you know. And so my awakening into everything that ended up being connected with graffiti, like the punk rock scene, was very much that same way, like sort of a little bit of sniffing it out, a little bit of blind discovery and luck, you know, and then there it was.
So I want to switch gears a little bit, and thank you for really giving us that introductory, because it seemed like there was the element of, you know, you had the school component, you know, and kind of the being a teenager, growing in that capacity, and then also just having that adoration of being out there and really seeing what's happening in the real world outside of school, seeing what's happening in the street, being on the block and all of that good stuff. So yeah. So tell me about, because we met briefly, you know, we had a little coffee conversation. So, you know, I recognize that you're a hitty individual like myself. So I want to get your take on this. Tell me about perception, right? How you feel like work impact your work sometimes? Like, if you go into a project optimistically, does it affect the end result?
Yeah, I mean, I think the problem with either the first foot forward or the end result in most projects is people's confusion as to the importance of, you know, recognizing that it's all manipulation of energy. So once you've made that a steady practice in and of itself, which is not easy, you know, even that becomes sort of a dissected variant by which we test ourselves to occasionally go outside of a supposed box that has us, so that we can give extra time, thought, meditation, and energy to this thing that we really love. But making that the everyday becomes like, that's the real, you know, that's the real juice. It's like that kind of daily meditation on things that we believe are the way forward with everything that we want to give our PMA to, you know, like for example, your question. So yeah, I think that inherently, energy wise, that for me as a creative, to some degree, I could say, I've found a more comfortable rhythm working for clients or having established a level of clientele than I have confronting the due issues of my own voice as a creative when it comes to survivalism, if that makes any sense. You know what I'm saying? Like, I have an easier time, and I always have, you know, just being myself as a painter, as an artist, as a creative thinker, working for somebody who needs of my skill set kind of is an exciting terrain of both freeing up any sense of connection and responsibility to the end result, and thusly, like, it's usually like this real churning engine to my positive attitude about what I'm doing. Much harder to find consistently when I'm like on my own shit.
I dig it.
Testing my own waters as to, like, you know, what are you cooking here or not? You know, like, what are you really feeling? Like, then it gets heady, you know, and then especially it gets even headier if that's that, you know, if there's any worry about the decided comeback of that with regard to, like, you know, like, oh my God, you're living off this, or you're trying to, you know. So it's been much easier for me. Like, I started out early in crossing over into professionalism creatively with decorative painting and stuff like that. Being on some really good teams too, working with some of the most talented people that I had ever or have ever, you know, had the chance to school under and learn from and be in a professional setting with. So that, and in both of those lights, with a couple of those people who I've worked with, one of the things garnished there, and that I really still kind of enjoy living by, is being able to, like, kind of hang up my own connection and ego place at the time that it comes for, like, you know, doing it for the job, doing it for the client. If I've been asked into a thing, because it feels good. Like, that's a tight exercise for me. I feel like artists and artisans who can get outside of their own need to, like, toot their horn, which, I mean, to my honest, you know, between me and you and the rest of the world, that shit gets rarer and rarer. Everybody's so on their shit, you know, that it's it's easy. It gets easier and easier for me to just show up and like, yeah, man, pay me to get the job done. I get out of here before the cupcakes and shit start.
That's great.
It's been a pleasure to be a part of a culture and community that's seen itself grow in so many ways that, you know, we're still deserving of really the applause and the excitement about being invited to the party to a degree, but also seeing through like the big breath it's going to take to like really grow up on and around the after excitement of what's become of, you know, which is always the case for like the trench work that has to be done, the digging out of the street warfare and shit that has to happen before, again, all of the glam and glitz and the red carpet can be rolled out behind a thing.
I get you. So I read that, you know, this quote, I found graffiti, I found myself, I made a way home, and Baltimore graffiti was the first thing that got me hot about creative things. So tell me about your first experience with like what was your first like tag? What was your first like experience with street art?
Oh God. Well, I mean, like when I first moved here, and again, like was just sort of a part of discovering the downtown area of Baltimore, seeing tags and growing up on looking at graffiti and trying to figure out what this really was. At that point, you know, there was an amount of spray paint tags around the area of the midtown threshold up and down St. Paul, Charles, you know, in and around the Micah corridor and that whole Mount Royal area, you know, but there was an even more available and yet at the same time not distributed in a way that it is today, where it's very like on what I call like kind of this grandstand, you know, look at me, I'm right here in your face kind of a kind of aesthetic that people have since adopted, but it was much more like sneaky. And it was much more like kind of, it was around, but the idea was to get it to last. The idea was to have it, you know, in the environment, but, you know, in ways that were not so invasive that people had to do something about it immediately, you know. So I grew up on this era of graffiti that was much more, you didn't have to look for it, but you did have to look for it. You had to actually be out and around and like in the alleys and in the back cuts and stuff like that. When you saw it, it felt right. It felt like it was placed consideratively inside the voice of the city, inside the poetry of the environment without being an a-hole, you know, like like during my time, literally, like I grew up with the guys that reinvented like, well, I'm going to march across town, you know, and just fat cap every corner, you know, across Lombard Street because I can. And that became a much more invasive sense of people looking at whatever was going on with the culture, like with a lot of disdain that you didn't have when I was young. But I think that kind of presence of mind and a desire for your placement to be a part of the environment, a part of the accepted rhythm of the voice of the city, that's still more important to me than anything, you know. Now it's turned into, you know, how much you get up or how often you do a thing, again, to the point of like over saturation. But most things that you can find with regard to that kind of culture are about a certain amount of overdoing the thing, or, you know, some level of Doritos extreme. It's just a part of the culture we've all grown into.
So I got two more questions for you before we get into those rapid fire ones I mentioned earlier. So I read about the Street Life Art Exhibition. Tell me about that.
When we did that exhibit, a part of what I was trying to encompass, not just in the show, but the title was like, one second. my second major, but maybe my third time out with working with a collage medium that I've been doing now for a few years, but as a painter at that time was kind of a new thing to me, new methodology for me in the studio.
Sure.
And something that I kind of picked up needing some kind of challenge, some kind of, I needed something to feel like I didn't know what the hell I was doing or where it was going, because it's just a freer sense of, I'll get my rhythm and my methodology down with something I feel successful with, like in the painting realm. And then my own expectations of how that math works gets very chop, chop, chop. And then getting outside of that box myself becomes sort of this difficult dance. So the balance in the studio becomes a practitioner in a direction where it's like I have no expectations, because I know I have no rhythm at this. I don't know what I'm doing. Haven't picked up a jar of glue since I was in fucking grade school. So I started messing with this thing and had decided, this, and it's weird. It kind of heralds back to some degree your question about when did I start, how was it that writing started for me, or what was the first act of street art? Because inherently when I grew up a writer, the crime side of it was still certainly, it was a major part of what graffiti writing, and then as far as graffiti writing goes, it still is, but as far as I think most people tend to, in their mind's eye, for the most part, think about the usage of the word street art. Someplace in there, things start to get gray. You hear the word street art, and it's like all of a sudden in the 9-to-5 world, folks are thinking all kind of other stuff other than some kind of crime happening, which is still the case a lot of the times. But those 9-to-5ers are right. A lot of times it's not. For a lot of these street artists, there's never been any crime to it. So for me, on the other hand, of like, when did I start doing street art versus also for me, when was I like really kind of turned on by the street, and did I start doing things that were like a part of living a life inherent to just being in the street, of which graffiti became a part for me. I grew up a skateboarder long before I was a graffiti writer.
Right.
And when I was young here in Baltimore, a skateboard as a form of like just youth transportation in combination with riding the buses was just like, that was a must. I knew kids from all neighborhoods of town, through the high school ages, where it's like we all had boards, and largely more for that reason of like teen transportation. It was not, that everybody was like practicing ollie tricks and things like that, or even doing that as, a get together for that reason, as much as it was just a part of how it helped you get around and traverse the terrain that we knew we had to deal with, because there were very few cars in people's lives and all that kind of stuff yet. So it was a crossover dual thing, although I had brought it with me from Florida and was one of the first people in my neighborhood to turn a lot of kids onto it. So street art and what was inspirational, what was environmental, what became a part of then my environmental based experience growing up with my youth from all different neighborhoods here and influencing each other out in the street. It's different now, when the idea of this whole street art thing has become much more packaged, but you got fewer and fewer motherfuckers who have a real street experience. Right. Yeah. For real.
That's true. Yeah.
And who think and or convinced that having a street experience is having a quote unquote, whatever they call it, gangster experience, or like a fucking, you in a life experience.
Yeah.
Which, albeit that's out there.
Yeah, but
But
that's not the only thing though.
it ain't the only thing. Yeah, never was, never will be. And, especially the way Baltimore is one of these places that, Hollywood is helped branded as like the bookend of like inherently being about, glorifying and quadrifying that in whatever sense it, from your angle, you take that because, I've never even sat in front of the wire. Like I was too busy. I'm still too busy for most television stuff, but I understand the aesthetics of what the thought machine in a general sense of when the world's between documenting how closely reality becomes written and is written a certain way, then becomes the actual truth of the diatribe that people make judgment by. We're trained for that, so it's just like, it's when that hits real close to home, it's very easy to feel edgy about it.
Yeah. So let's see. I think in there you kind of gave me what I needed for that last question. So I want to hit you with the rapid fire ones.
Yeah, do it.
We're wrapping up. So and with these we want to be as brief in it because that's the purpose of rapid fire, right?
Right.
What is your golden rule?
Oh man, you know what? It's definitely, it's crazy. It's kind of, I saw a little snippet of Helen Mirren taking an award the other night, and funnies as shit. It's kind of how I feel about things that I've reduced myself down to with the inclusivity of like, just trying to remain open, which is just like, show up, do your damnedest, and don't be an a-hole.
That's a legit one.
I'm for respecting the lesson in every room, knowing that I'm to a point in my life where a lot of what I bring to that situation may be the diligence to keep with refreshing my need for an open mind as a cat rounding out of a certain chapter of how fast time is processing. Because I think it's real easy for folks in my age group to like check out. And I hang out with a lot of kids, so it's real easy for me to be close to what's happening, but still extra work to make sure that I'm keeping up on what sort of dialogues and things are formed in people's minds. As a parent, I'm super, obviously, I'm interested in having some kind of handle on that because I've always been connected to youth culture. What I do is, and forever will be, representative of, as it should be, youth culture. Yeah. Even if it's still being handled by a bunch of old gray-haired wizards, it's what it is.
So this is the last rapid fire one I got for you. Are you a collector? Do you collect anything?
Oh yeah, that's all I do.
What do you collect? What's the thing that you collect most?
Let's see. You don't got your cameras on. Right here I have curlers.
Oh wow.
Curlers. Yeah, it says them on the box.
Those are all metal too. Holy shit.
You could see, I was looking at, this is all records in front of me. Right here, I got 3 different miniature record players.
Yeah.
Right here on the floor. Also look here.
Oh wow.
Boom boxes.
Oh yeah.
That ain't all of them. That's just 4. Everything I have. I actually, there was a photographer over here last week from Be More Art, because they're doing something on artists who collect as a part of their process. And basically that's all I do is collect. I don't have one of anything. Everything I have a whole bunch of stuff.
I dig it.
And that my work consists in that. When I was telling you about that collage work, that tripped off because as we were tying in there, it's like people are so on this street art thing. And as a graffiti writer, you get thrown under that bus when it's coming no matter what. Now, it's like whether you want to be a street artist, that's what you or like, but I've always been inspired by the street and or other like photographers and people whose work was inspired by the street before they needed to put it in that box. So I decided that this work in the studio, this collage work that I was doing, was going to be based on street art. I was going to do some street art that wasn't
street art
in the street. But it was because as a collector for years, I have been collecting these bags and they're empty bags that were used for asphalt. Up in Reisterstown, just off Reisterstown Road, south side of Pikesville, there's a spot where it's like this mom and pop owned asphalt company that makes this temporary black asphalt called black fill. That's used. The Department of Public Works is their number one buyer of this black fill asphalt. They use it for water main breaks and potholes and stuff like that. And they've had a really bad habit of like using the bags and then just leaving the bags on the street, right, when they empty them with some broken pipes or whatever. So I've been collecting these bags for years because I like the look of them and knew I would get around to using them for something at some point, right? So boom, come around to this thing. I'm going to start a collage project based on street art, which is, you can't get no more street art than making your collage out of bags of asphalt that's actually the street. So it was just kind of like a tongue-in-cheek joke, right? Yeah. Like I started it out as these motherfuckers want street art. I'll give it to them,
Here's your street art right here.
No street art would be better than the ass, So that was my point and purpose, and it got like real kind of serious, like I got into a rhythm with it. I was really responding to the paper. They were the best paintings I had made in a long time, and it wasn't paint. So I got into this whole thing of like a deep obsession with recycling of all types of paper off the street, not just the bags of asphalt, but the McDonald's bags and the Trident wrappers and, just like all kind of things. And then I was taking rubbings of manhole covers and all kind of things and adding in all these textures from outdoors and from on the ground to go along with mixing into the energy of all this stuff that I had collected off the ground, but it's literally all trash. It's all just like shit off the street that somebody had tossed over their shoulder, and that's, I stay strict to this regimen of having had to pick it up off the ground or bent over on the ground and taken the image or stolen the texture from the ground, or I can't use it. Like that's how my work is made. Yeah. So I collect in order to create. Like it's inherent to what I do when I'm doing that indoors.
I dig it.
You collect spots when you're bombing. In a way, you're collecting when you're leaving your mark out because you're taking toll of these places that you go and do these things, or how many trains you hit and shit. Like it's a similar form of hoarding.
So
hoarding and letting go at the same time. It's a good practice.
Dig it. So that's pretty much all the questions that I have for today. But I want to invite you and thank you for being on this podcast. So thank you so much for being on this podcast.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me. I'm really glad we met. It's a good thing.
Totally. And two, I want to invite you to tell the fine folks where to check out your work, your social media, and all of that good stuff.
Oh, well, you can find my work on The Real Adam Stab on IG. Definitely going to be having a couple of out and about dates posted on there real soon. I got a collaboration coming up with Currency, and looking real forward to that and working with Michael and his partner. We got some fun stuff up the sleeve, and another outdoor endeavor just with regard to celebrating the graph culture that I'm trying to get off the ground right now, that'll definitely be posted on there with regard to like stuff I got going here in town.
Sounds great. So I'm going to wrap up there. So for the super interesting and talented Adam Stab, I am Rob Lee saying that there's art in and around Baltimore. You just got to look for it.